So today I'll define the status quo and share why we want to stop the status quo, what that means, and the importance of letting go of the status quo so you thrive. I can't give you all the answers today because we don't have forever to talk about this. And so once I'm done with the information, we can open it up for conversation or questions and whatnot. Even if we have enough time, I'll break us into small groups to just discuss what's going on in your life in relationship to this burden of the status quo. What set us up for what's going on now? So the status quo to me is the permission we give for our way of being including expression to be governed by others. So think about how much that limits us. As a child, we may have had a parent that said, this could be kind of harsh, but shut up, or stop laughing, or be quiet. And we can think that that's synonymous for just women or just, but it's every child has had this experience where their parent is frustrated or so and so, even if it's a perceived situation of a parent going against what the child is expressing and just feeling naturally, if a parent isn't gentle with it, the child takes it as this is scary. And the more of that we have built up, of course, we're building up trauma and we're getting into a place of we don't know ourselves because I don't know how to act to stay safe around you. I don't know who to be anymore, right? So then we're perpetuating the cycle of who should I be? Who should I be? And now we wonder why we're at this place of saying, What's my life purpose? Why do I feel stuck? This is why. It's the status quo, this way of being that was governed by others' ideas. Could be a caregiver, could be educators, could be a doctor telling us, you don't know your body. And I mean, that's happened to so many people, right? Men and women. So it's that limitation that's there. And then we maintain out of that a false sense of belonging. So once we have this experience of, I don't know that I can fully trust you, we start to be unsure about that belonging with that person or that group. Oftentimes, and perhaps people that are showing up here today could be people that maybe didn't identify with their family or part of society. They get out there and they say, boy, I felt really different than my family. Or I keep getting into jobs where I can do the work, but it's not really challenging. It's not really filling me. The people that I'm working with don't really make too much sense to me. I can just get through. These are signs that we can see something other, and that is the expansiveness of us. It's our expression that wants to come forward. And I'm not saying at all, ditch that job or get away. Be aware of it. It means that you kind of hold a key, and that's an important thing. It's something that's important for us to acknowledge within ourselves, but also understand we've locked it down and it's okay. So, this false sense of belonging, I'll talk about what that comes out of, which I think is kind of tricky in the scheme of it. But then we feel like we're on shaky ground, right? We're struggling to trust because we've been told, no, don't be yourself. Don't react the way that you do, even if it's joyful. And then we're feeling this sense of, I don't trust, I don't feel like I belong. And we're on shaky ground questioning ourselves. So it's a small thing that we overlook because does it really matter? Most of the situations and scenarios we think, oh, who cares about that? But that's where we get into trouble is we're at the point where we need to start calling it out. And I'll talk about that in a little bit too. So I'm going to go into a story about a woman. Her name is Anita Morjani. You may have heard of her. She wrote a book, yeah, long ago. I think it was 2007 or 11. But she was very ill. And the importance of the story here is what kept her ill is she didn't listen to herself. She listened to all the voices outside of her, and she had a type of cancer that became vicious in her body. And the one thing I remember hearing, that's really important in this story is she's from India, but she lived in Hong Kong, and she went back to India to work with one healer and heal her body, and it started really helping. She was getting better and better and better. And then she went back to Hong Kong, and there were all these friends and people that were well-meaning, but that's part of the status quo is the well-meaning friend. Well, they meant well, but in a way they don't know for you. And so it's not well-meaning. And we might put our hand on somebody and say, I know you think you mean well, and that isn't going to work for me anymore. I just need you to listen. Because if we start cutting it off where it begins, we're making that available for other people. And the person, if they're really a close friend, they're going to understand it and say, oh, I get it. I wouldn't want somebody to do that to me. Right? We use a lot of terms and statements to try and stop conversation because we become uncomfortable. That's part of our trauma. And we'll talk about that in a little bit too. But back to Anita. So she went back to Hong Kong. She got sicker and sicker and sicker until she had this near death experience. She died for a bit of time, came back into her body. They had to stitch these awful sores on her body that were large or have surgery. She knew they wouldn't even need to stitch them. She was well again, and she knew she would heal. And the next day they came in to take her to surgery. She didn't even need the surgery because her body was healing. They were giving her chemo and doing all these things, and she knew it wouldn't even affect her body. And the point there is she knew. She understood now. She has moved beyond and knows for herself. And that is an incredibly powerful thing in a world that is incredibly fear-based and is set on you not knowing for yourself. This is the status quo. And I'll talk about how we make excuses for that and it causes us greater grief. So think about Anita when you're in a moment where you know that you need to decide for yourself and you're scared and you don't know what to decide. Stick with yourself, even if it doesn't make any sense. Don't talk about it with others. Call a friend. And later in this, I have this statement, but I'll say it now too, is it's okay to say, boy, I'm really struggling with this process that I'm working out. And I just need you to know that. You don't need to let them know the details or the information about what you're processing because the potential of them getting in the way of what you know is too high. We need to cut out the other voices. And I'll tell you, just to give you some sense of this shit isn't always easy, is personally, some mornings I wake up and I'm fighting so hard in my career, I just burst out in tears. It just rage to let it through. I'm a highly creative person and she's not coming out. And I'm also pretty stubborn and tough, right? I had to be to get through my own childhood and experience, which is great because I made it, right? But we want to be okay with that too, of letting it out. The emotions, we have to go through the door to leave the room. We go through the emotions to move out of them. And being aware of that, opening yourself to that, even if it's embarrassing. I mean, I just met a man, he's an American, but he's in Dublin and is getting citizenship in Ireland. And he's almost at the tail end of that. But I said to him some of my fears, and he was right along. We could actually be vulnerable together. And that's the benefit is when you move further and further out of the status quo, you start to meet people who I've never met this guy in my life. And two people were like, you guys have to get together and talk about business. And they were completely right on that our vulnerability and within 5 minutes, we were sharing things that we were both like, this is great because we can really push each other to a point that's uncomfortable and know that the other person is there for one another. That's incredibly powerful. That's outside of the status quo. Although I'm not going to talk about the model today, but he's in the model a bit. Maybe I am too with him a little bit. That's okay. We're just working on the status quo now. So it also gives permission for the victim to be wrong twice, this status quo. I'm going to use a really classic example, which is the woman who gets raped and was told it was her fault. And there's no consequence for the perpetrator. We could play that scenario that I just said out in a male situation and a female. I mean, it's not about that. There are so many situations where the perpetrator has no consequence. That also reinforces the status quo of, well, that's just how things are. You wore your skirt too short. You know the story. I don't even need to tell you. So in this, one of the important pieces is we tend not to cross primary relationships. And that's where we get stopped, is those primary relationships with a parent, a caregiver, a very long time family friend. We say, okay, I'll just kind of keep it quiet. I won't say the thing that I really know I need to say, right? I won't hold that position of saying, hey, that doesn't work for me. Or I used to be okay with that. I'm not anymore. I've changed, right? And that's an incredibly important place that we do it. I'll tell you, I've traveled for quite some time in Eastern Europe, and many of the cultures I was in, the men are more dominant. It's just part of the deal. And many young women, so daughters and wives, we'd be talking and they'd make a comment about their dad or their partner. And I could tell they were a little bit afraid of them. Not that the person was being overtly abusive or bad or whatever. I mean, I'm not going to use the word bad, but harsh on them. But it was clear they weren't the father or the partner wasn't communicating in a way that was safe. And these women would say, "But that's just how he is," or "That's just how they are. That's just how my mom is." And we have to stop that language because it gives permission for the exact thing that we are not creating this future for ourselves with it. We're getting stuck in this position of, um, well, we're going to have to let them be. And really, what we're saying without saying it is, I'm afraid of them. And that's so sad. And these women, I'd say to them, do you realize that permits the status quo to persist? And do you realize what it tells me is you are afraid of your father or your partner? Oh, no, 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 I'm not. But we need to be the ones who start that process and tell our girlfriend and tell our guy friend, hey, we're not doing that anymore. I am in cabs all the time. It's my favorite place to be sometimes. And I talk to the cab drivers and I say to them, the craziest stuff, right? They often ask, you're from the US, what's going on there? Why is this happening? What's that? And I give them logical responses, and notoriously, they will change their mind by the time I'm getting out of that cab. I even had one cab driver in Sarajevo in Bosnia. He's about the same age as me. And we got to the place where he let me off at the airport. But before he got there, he had been thinking a lot about what I said, and he turned back and he nodded, like, I get it. We're on the same page. We have very similar things going on in our own countries. We're not alone. We're in this together, right? So we can be that person. And I'm not saying be kind. I'm not saying get out there and be, an activist for this type of work. I'm saying where you see it, we got to get it right there. Hey, wait a minute. I just want to call that out for a second. Can you say that again? Because if we start inquiring and being curious, it's going to change things. And the other piece of it is, this is a bigger conversation. It might be a completely additional event, but what I've really come to see is that attachment, that concept sets us up to be a victim. Either you attached or you didn't. It's a part of the fixed point model. But connection is undeniable. And a child who knows that they're connected to their parent can feel their parent even if they're separated from them. And this is super rare. But I'll tell you this quick story. When my kids were little, I'm kind of a space case and I get a little bit relaxed when I go to stores like, to buy um, our home supplies and groceries and so on. And I finally realized it's a lot for me to make sure I know where the kids are and make sure that, all the things. So I said to my kids when they were probably, 4 and 6, hey, I have this tendency to walk off. I just do. I get kind of lost in the store. So I just want you to keep your eye on me so that I don't get lost. I reversed the situation there, right? And my kids developed a sense of where I was all the time. They would never yell for me in the house because they could sense. I even had a friend that lived with us for 2 years, and she said, Amy, when you're about 3 blocks from the house, I can feel the entire house shift. They know you're coming, and everybody gets kind of excited. And I was like, there it is. We want that responsiveness, not the responsibility, right? And that is connection. My kids know. Yeah, I mean, I have one kid, I was at a store once, about 25 minutes away from where I lived, and I could feel my daughter incredibly. All of a sudden, I was ringing up at this thing, and the guy and I were chatting, and I said, I've got to go. I just can tell. Can we finish? And he said, sure. And I got out of the store. I got all the way home, and it was bitterly cold. And my daughter was locked out of the house, and she had been there probably 20 minutes. So we know and we can feel each other, and that's where we want to head. We want to get out of this attaching to something and get into the connection is undeniable. It is so much more rock solid and strong. We can feel when our kid is off and send them a little text, hey, how are you doing? Right? We'll know, much more powerful. And we give them permission by showing them as a parent or a friend or a sibling or any of these parts, how we do it. When we reach out like that and they say, hey, I don't want to talk about it. No problem. I'm here whenever you need. I'm available, right? We keep that flowing and they know. Okay, so we struggle to cross those primary relationships, and they are probably exactly the ones that we need to cross a little bit to be able to see, is this healthy for me? Boy, I've had to face that question so many times. You can hear it in my voice, a little shaky, with a lot of relationships that were very close. And I've had to leave pretty much all of them. And that's not easy for me. I love to connect. I love people, right? And new people come in and it gets better and better. I just told you a story about that. But we must challenge some of these relationships to see how they play out. Now, an example of that on the other side is I used to fire people in a job that I had, and they'd leave happy. They'd leave all bubbly and fine. And the reason they did is I'd say to them, "You know what, when I really think about it, you're not cut out for this company, and I would highly recommend you check out these 2 other companies. You didn't hear it from me, but I see it in you, and I know those companies well." And they leave with potential, right? So we're creating that connection. We don't necessarily have to damage something or hurt that person. I probably will never see them again. But the same holds true with what we can see in that person. We can excavate it a little bit, see if they're willing to come our direction. Otherwise, I am pro us taking a break or stepping away for a bit to heal that part of our side of it and see who we attract as a result. Because where we're headed, we're going to be in a constant state of movement forward. And what we're preparing for is that things and people attract to us in a way of manifestation that is just crazy off the rails. I mean, that sounds so great, and it will be great. It will look like people that are able to do this will look like magic because you're in a constant aligned space. And it's not that you have to try for it. It's that when we let this other piece go, it falls away. And in truth, this status quo and all the things that I write about in my book, the model and so on, in a way are all rocket boosters to get us where we're headed. So it's not that that was bad or an accident or it isn't. I mean, I'm going to swear here, it has fucking not been easy for any of us, right? I mean, we've had to face things, and probably most of us are from a similar generation. And I think we probably raised our parents to some degree, and then we raised our children, and now we have to turn and raise ourselves. It's a lot. But the reality is we're capable of it. We're able to do a lot on our own, and we're in touch with what it means to be on our own. So we can't stand fear in place of finding connection, in real connection. So if there are people that can't connect with you and we question our attachment, that probably is going to just resolve in us looking at it and saying, I'm a victim of a circumstance there because these people, the attachment is not actually a healthy position in it. I know that's new thinking and it's relatively new for me too, but I've kind of done some research in Buddhism too to look at that. I'm like, yeah, there's a correlation there. I think psychology has a little bit of a misstep in that, but more to come. Um, so what results is contorted family relationships, contorted primary relationships, and we end up leveraging things in our world instead of living in this way that we are. And that's not going to work out. We have to be who we are. The expanded state means that we live in our uniqueness, not in our specialness. That's also something that creates a problem, right? If we see you're special. I remember a therapist saying that when I was a lot younger. And I thought that's not right. And I didn't know why. And now I see why. It's the same thing that happened in the United States. We said we're the best. We're the best. And if I think I'm special, I don't really spend all of this time understanding myself. I'm like, well, I am special, so that's just what it is. Instead of actually looking at it, it's like getting validation from outside instead of from inside. It trips us up and it doesn't work out well for us. So let's look at this. The next piece really is why we want the status quo to stop. And the reason is it's the precursor to a needs-based problem through hiding the truth. If we really think about that, so I'm going to read it again. Why we want to stop the status quo is because it is the precursor to a needs-based problem through hiding the truth. So when somebody says to you, particularly in a primary relationship, that you're wrong and blah 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 blah, and then they walk away, like they fire away at you, what they're really doing is They had a need that got paved over. And they went more of a, we're going to say narcissistic, even though that's not, I'm going to call it narcissistic social disordering direction with it, where they became discombobulated and they just stayed disordered inside. And now all of a sudden they have you saying something that triggers that within them. And they're firing at you because they want you to carry the emotions because nothing's wrong with them. Okay. So this problem has to do with they're not going to address what's going on with them ever. And now you're carrying the weight of this burden, and they love that. It feels so good to them because they're like, for a moment longer, I can perpetuate that I'm perfect and everything's okay. Okay. So we want to, I'm going to go back to this, really get away from statements like that's just how they are, or that's just how it is. It's not just how it is. And we need to be the challenger in that. How else could it be? Who else can we be in this to make it change, to make it happen differently? And how does that look? How does that feel to you? What do you think about that? I even had an experience where my father said to me once, and I was an adult, like 42 years old or more, and he said, I was asking you a question. He was like, no, or say, I don't, and then he said, and I said, why? And he said, because I'm the father and I say so. And I thought, good Lord, really? But that's where he was, right? And I didn't say anything back. This is a long time, quite a while ago, but we didn't touch it. It worked for him. He could conceal his trauma. And then there I am carrying it like, well, I'm silent now. There's nothing I can say to this because I've been taught it's not worth going there. It just gets worse. Or he's right, I'm wrong. And we stop that process of inquiring or trying to connect. And my dad, for all intents and purposes, was really a connector. And even there in him. So we've all probably been on the receiving end, I'm certain we have, of that scenario in some form or another, playing out the resistance of the status quo being put on our shoulders of this is how it is at the job. We don't have room for improvement. There's no money, yet they're paying the CEO a lot of money. They're paying you peanuts, right? So, like I said, ask, is it the way it is? And remind others that you hear saying, well, that's just how they are in their own world, that allows the status quo to persist and it's not going to serve us. And it's a really beautiful entrance into these greater pieces about what has to break down in order for us to really heal and come back to that center. And you might see in their eyes confusion because they think, what do you mean? Why are you questioning this? Because they don't see anything wrong with it. And it's okay to say to them that, when you're feeling that or you're questioning it in a different way, you just let me know and let's talk about it. You can always give them room. When you're ready, let me know because they might have a bit of fear about letting that go. And another piece that's a part of this is what happens is we become lonely, right? And it's a loneliness in some ways that we can't necessarily always articulate. We might be really comfortable with ourselves. I think I know a lot of women that are very comfortable being with themselves and not having others around. But there's a loneliness inside of us, and I believe it's a yearning for this expression of who we are to burst forward. It's the hunger to have that come out and forward most, be really available to us. But we might feel like our voice won't be heard. And in truth, what's happening is that the other is stopping us at all costs, like I said, because of their trauma, right? So they're saying, you stop because it's becoming too much for me. Instead of saying, ooh, this is becoming too much for me. I'm going to take a minute and then let's come back together and talk. Like we're teaching that, but we're going too far too fast. In a way, my work would say if they're not getting it, and a lot of people aren't willing to go to therapy and figure it out, but we have to step away. We have to be the ones that say no to it and deal with our side of it outside of that relationship, or like I said, challenge this relationship a little bit to see, can it go there? But because that status quo is well rooted, often it can't. And the person delivering it or dishing it out can't see it, and most often won't be willing to. Okay. The other piece of it is that person who's dishing it out, in their mind, at some level, they believe all hell will break loose. I mean, maybe we've all had that experience where if I break this part of my psyche, is all hell gonna break loose? And you know when you're dealing with something in your psyche that's really challenging, because you can feel it. You feel like, I just don't even want to do this, you know. But you do it anyway, you move through it, but that's a tough spot. So you can respect too that they might feel like all hell will break loose and everything will become confusing or whatever it means for all hell to break loose. But for me, I say it's time that we let all hell break loose. And in a sense, what we're watching around the world is all hell breaking loose. It really is to some degree. Everybody has mismatched ideas about how this and that. But what I think is really interesting is the people who have some really strong ideas tend not to look at them like the humanity in it, right? I think there's a missing piece. There's something that is troublesome for us. Okay, so that other person is working to hide their trauma and not address. We need to be very open-eyed about that. They're not knowing better than we do. They're not, all the things they're saying are not really where it's coming from. It's not the energy of it. And it may leave us, if we've had enough of that, which I think probably we have here, that it may leave us feeling like we need fixing or questioning, am I secure? Does this person really love me? Do they care? Questioning all these pieces. But worse, we struggle to trust these people, and that is not foundationally sound for a relationship. We need trust in a relationship. Of course we do. And remember, when in truth, it really is the other person's responsibility to address their pain and stop putting it onto others. And I think that's the piece of the status quo of we've been really permissive that we're wrong. You know, we'll take it just to hang in there in relationships. And this is just another caveat, which not all of us are parents, but if you're exposed to younger children in your work or in your family, we need to hold both female and male children accountable with natural consequence. And sometimes we really have to think about that consequence, because with the status quo, we can feel very far away from what would be an easy consequence that would be natural to them. But we do this so they learn and grow. And it is all of our responsibilities to nudge the parent and say, hey, you know what I think might work out really nicely here? And that might feel like you're overstepping. But when a parent is struggling, I think we can start to step in and just gently say some things like, hey, you know what? When my kid was that age, here's what I did. And it just worked magically. But this doesn't mean punishment. It means consequence. The child is paying back the energy in some way. And it means that the child carries the emotion of their action and they restore the situation through making amends in some way based on that natural consequence. So let's go back to that again. When a child crashes a car, maybe it was an accident and so on, the child comes home, and rightfully so, the parent is panicked, right? Like probably fearful, probably a bit angry, a whole bunch of emotions are there. And some parents say to the child, are you okay? And the child says yes. But some parents just fly off the handle and go crazy on the child because they're thinking about all of the inefficiency. That's sick, but that's true. What is happened to the car? What has to happen here? And they kind of forget about the child. So in that situation, that's a high level situation to create a natural consequence. But if the child was being negligent, my consequence might be, until I'm ready, you're not going to be able to drive the car. And until I'm filled up in that way, that's going to be the deal. And I might say that later. I might say to a child in that situation, I'm really glad that you're well, you know, and everything's fine. And I'm going to need some time to think about this and I'll get back to you. And your child will be shitting bricks because they know what's coming. They know there's going to be a consequence. And the beauty of that is they carry the weight of emotion of the situation, the gravity of their action. And it's not that we're easy on a kid who's responsible. They still had something happen. We aren't punitive to them, but we let them carry the emotion. The parent then can feel free of the fear because they're collaborating with their child. They're not going to take all of the responsibility and burden. Like a little example, and this is from my personal life, is one of my kids was using my car out in the woods in the forest, and something on the bottom of the car broke, and it was a cheap part and so on. And even the mechanic said, yeah, this is a cheap part. So it was a $50 fix or maybe a $100 fix. And I said to my co-parent, they need to pay half of that. So you need to tell them, because I wasn't going to be around for a bit. And they didn't, and they just paid the bill. The parent did. And then the thing broke again, and I had to fix it, and the mechanic fixed it for me without charging, whatever. Okay, so that happened. But then the next time, the child's backing the car out, and it hits the mirror a little bit, and it breaks a little piece off the mirror. And I went to find out, it was like, because it's an electric mirror, $1,300. And had the child paid the $50, I think they would have been more careful watching to make sure the car was safe. This child is somebody who is very responsive to situations, but that's where we have to stop the process with people in our lives. That's why I say, as soon as something starts happening that's a status quo situation, where that's just how it is, that's just how he is, we make an excuse for something, that's where we need to ask the question right there to stop the process, so it's a $100 fix versus a $1,300 fix. Once they have the consequence, they're going to understand to stop the process. Okay. By your faces, that looks like that's a little bit loose for y'all. I hope it makes sense. I'm an abstract thinker. Okay. Okay. So I want to go back to this. When natural consequence is overridden, we don't mature and bigger problems happen. I just gave you an example. I'm going to give you another example. I raised my kids next to somebody who had the same gender kids 2 months apart. Our children were both the first set and the second set of kiddos. And at one point, I couldn't help myself, and it was kind of mean, but I said, you're enabling your kid. And they were just enabling one of the children, but they had learned that that gender of child needs to be enabled because they're not able, even though that's not true. Right? So one of the things that they said is this child was 12, 13, 14, and they needed to take them 4 hours away to some sporting event for the weekend. And they did this regularly. The kid was in traveling sports. And I said, boy, wouldn't it be nice? You work full time and you have an intense job. If you could send your kid with this family this weekend, and then you could take the kids the next weekend or so on. And the mom said to me, I can't do that because my child will leave their toothbrush behind. And I said, sounds like that kid needs to take some birthday money and have it written down what type of toothbrush your family uses and walk to the store 1 mile away and get a new one with their own money. And the parent couldn't even hear me. That there's a consequence for leaving your toothbrush, but what a great experience. A toothbrush is just a few dollars. But that parent didn't listen or hear me, I'll say. And over the years, it grew worse and worse and worse until this kid was at somebody's house and they were throwing something around and something in the room that was very valuable broke. And all the kids pointed to this kid. That's the cause of it, right? It's no accident. The energy's there with that child of, I'm not capable. I can't do it. Right? And the kid loses himself in it. They're perpetuating being a child versus growing up and learning things that are age appropriate parts of what we need to know as humans. Getting a toothbrush when you leave it behind. Right? And we don't need to be overbearing about that. And, like I remember I must have broken a hammer. That sounds crazy, but when I was a kid, and my mom was just livid, but she didn't talk to me for quite a few days. And so my experience with that was you get shut out when you do something wrong. And I went without it being asked, I went to the bank, took out money, and went to a hardware store and replaced that tool on my own, right? Highly responsible. But had I been met in a way of connection in that situation, I would have been responsive to it. I'm going to make good on this because I care about our relationship. And I understand it doesn't work for you that I broke this tool. Um, because for whatever reason, it was very frustrating for them. And it wasn't a special tool or such, but we want to be looking at that responsive piece. Also expectations. It is good to have some expectations with people in our lives. We can also look at it as expectancy. We believe they're going to do the right thing or be honest with us. I can't be that for you. I would like to, but I can't, right? That's more expectant than having expectations about, well, why didn't they do that for me? That's what comes out of that. It's kind of the same idea that I have about attachment versus connection, very different positions. Yeah. So we want to evaluate that people in our lives who are deep in the status quo, are they healthy relationships for us or not? And you can watch them play out pretty easily. You challenge it a little bit and they're super reactive. This doesn't mean, I've had a lot of experience with this, but it doesn't mean you've hurt them or we get into that I'm a problem or what happened there. It's not about you. It really is not. But the reality is they're actually probably trying to get you to go away because it's not a lined up situation anymore. And that they're signaling there's a better situation for you. So in a way, as crazy as it sounds, they're doing you a spiritual favor to say, go find the people who are really your people. And I see this in a relationship. I'm not sure how to explain this one without giving it away, but where I had a relationship with somebody and I triggered the bejesus out of them. Right. And so we struggled to create a loving relationship together. But now somebody's come into their life who has way less of that patterning because this person expresses on a very similar pathway to this person. So what's happened is the person isn't operating off of narcissistic social disordering because this other person lines up with them and they're actually able to cultivate more love and be even with each other. So this has to do with something else, which is displacement, misplacement, and being misunderstood. And we're not going to talk about that today. But when we're with the right people, that's when our life looks magic. And in this era, for some of us, it will be epic. I mean, look at me. I cut loose in the world and I have met many people. I mean, even I had a friend that was sick in 2024 and I went to my phone to see who I could ask to help. And I had more numbers from people out in the world than I did from my own country, right? I'm like, that's the change. But as I've gotten further, I've met true friends. And now I'm in a situation where, interestingly, in Ireland, there's more of a business connection here for me. And I'm meeting incredibly powerful business people that are really helpful and able to be vulnerable. Incredible, right? They can communicate well. And in line with how I operate too. That's powerful. That's all we really need. Okay. Okay, so the importance of letting go of the status quo so you thrive, that you truly thrive. We need to think differently. And if we're thinking differently and we're open to thinking differently in situations when we're with people we've been around a long time, we're going to start to recognize, oh yeah, I feel that when they say it. Becomes somatic, right? Like, oh, I can feel it in my throat. I can feel it in my heart. I can feel it in my gut. What they're saying doesn't sit well with me. And it's okay to put your hand on somebody and say, hang on a second. Can you just stop there for a second and hang in it with yourself for a minute? Because you're learning and they're not going to lash out at you or be hard on you. Just give yourself that time to sense through what is going on and find the words. And I always think this, when we're afraid we won't find the words, we will find them. They will come to us, but it's simply saying, let those words be there. Like, what is the most powerful thing I could say right now? And then you pause and don't be uncomfortable about the moment that it's taking for that information to come to you. And it might not work the first time because we get too scattered, But every time I've done it, it's worked. And I never think it will work. But I say, when I don't know, I say, what do I say? And I've had some hot narcissists in my life, like, hot and heavy. And I found the words that changed the tide of the situation by not finding them, just letting them become apparent. Like, okay, that's what I need to say here. So we need to think differently. It's perspective. The way it's been cannot continue. It cannot continue. And we need to keep an open mind to how we see things too, right? So we're really thinking differently, but we're keeping an open mind once that comes to us, like, gosh, wow, it feels like they just kicked me in the gut. What? I didn't realize, maybe I felt that a million times, or I just feel it this one time. And especially if we just feel it this one time, we might stop. And if it's somebody that is in a primary relationship with us, like a close friend, we might say that to them. Boy, it feels like I just got kicked in the gut. What's that about? Because they might hang in there and be curious with us and explore it. And then we both come to even places with it. And we can see in that a relationship is healing and moving out of the status quo and moving forward. Or if they're resisting, they're going deeper into it. And like Anita Moorjani, I want you to think of how to stick with what you think is right, what you sense is right. And the other piece of it is, and not say a thing. If we start sharing it with people, we can get muddled, right? What do you think about this? And it almost can become an addiction. And really what's happening is that our need to connect is so extraordinary. We're so hungry for it that we think, I just need that connection with that person, even if it's a little bit. And that's what the status quo has provided, is we scrap for a shred of love instead of really cutting loose in the way that is necessary for us, whatever that means for you as an individual, and receiving that love that is really, really pure. I call it, at the highest level of it, it's eternal. And mostly what we're living is cathexis, which is obsession. And what I just described there about reaching out to this person, asking this person and your closest friends and bringing them in, often, if you look at those patterns, is obsession. I don't know what choice to make. I'm scared. I'm not sure. We don't know, when we don't know, we can get into that loop of looking and looking. Okay, so I want to tell you a story that's going to take it to a little bit of a different direction, but to establish what I'm talking about the status quo and what can happen. So when my kids were younger, we had friends that were PhD scientists and they had children. So our kids would play together and we'd have dinner at each other's homes and go skiing at the cabin and all these things. And one time, the four adults like to cook very much. And we were talking about tools with which we cook. And I think pans came up and I said, I just don't feel good about nonstick pans. And the man that was the chemist said right away, oh, and was gentle, but said right away, oh no, they're really safe. And this is the math, and this is the science, and this is the information, and this is at this point, blah, blah, blah. And I said, I still don't think they're safe. So the power in it is, in my home, we had stainless steel pans that were really nice. The grandkids will fight over them, right? And if I was at somebody's house and we were eating off of nonstick, I didn't panic. That's fine, no problem. But something in me said something's wrong there. But in the other side of it, now in January of 2026, right now, there are 15,000 lawsuits because of PFAS, which includes what is in nonstick coating, because of cancers and illness and this forever chemical that's causing all these problems. Had we not had nonstick that way, we wouldn't have had this chemical ever created, right? So in that, some people don't get sick from it. They could eat off of completely chipped pans, no problem. And they're just untouchable in a way with that thing. They might be touchable in another way with something else in our world, but with that one thing, they're not. Then there are people who get sick from it. And they may have thought, is it good for me? Isn't it good for me? What's the situation here? And decided, I'm going to go with it and use it. And then they get sick. And then they find out the illness potentially was caused from these pans. And they're upset and they feel disheartened and they feel like they trusted something. and they trusted the science and math, and now that where is it? What's the deal? And then there's a group of people that do what is really posturing in the model, but we're not going to go too far with that today, is they are saying, "Oh, nonstick is not safe, blah, blah, blah." I didn't say that to my friend. I just said what I felt, said it once more, and was done with it. Because I respect what this person's learned, even though it's not what I believe is true for my family or for me. So the people that are this is bad, they're really using a form of control on others to say, nonstick isn't safe, it's unhealthy, it's this and it's that, and it's so on. That what happens is when we surpass that physical illness piece, what do? We did what Anita Moorjani did. We did what I did. We decided for ourselves. We knew that was safe for me. That is not safe for me. Like I said, if somebody was using nonstick, I didn't think a thing of it. That makes me healthy with it. Do you understand? We want to adopt this thinking when I say keeping an open mind, changing our perspective. And we know that the people that are saying, that's not healthy, and they think they have all the facts, we tend to find that annoying or difficult to deal with. And why? Because it might not be true for us. And if it is true for them, instead of knowing it for themselves, they are not in power with themselves. They're controlling that information and the people, and they're feeling important based on something that might not be true for everybody. Right? So we want to let that go. We want to recognize I've done it, been up in arms about something, right? This one thing I wasn't, but we want to be in that powerful place of I know for myself. And the beauty of it is, and this is where the expansion comes in time, down the road, I don't think we're going to speak much because we know we're expanding and moving. And then what we need comes in, but it's not going to be what we have been getting, which is a lot of lessons. It will be people that only expand us. And that also is the importance of recognizing perhaps this person isn't lined up with me because we keep hitting these difficulties, right? When we recognize that and we let it go, what we need can really flow in. And so we're learning that reflex on a small level, or some of us a grand level, to understand what that expansion will feel and look like and the power of it. Okay, we need power over everything else. That's a massive piece of this. We will love easily because we won't have resistance in a relationship. We'll see the person and we'll want their expansion and believe in them and have our own expansion. You know this probably with somebody on earth in your life, but it's probably not a lot of people. But in the future, we're going to know it with a lot of people and we will delight in their expansion. Right? We'll be so happy for them because it is where everything indeed is connected. It follows the loop of logic in that statement because it's not actually so solid to say everything is connected. That's not, it's a illogical statement. Okay. So we each have that spot in us that we protected, right? And our resistance to these other people, wanting them to love us and so on, probably comes from that experience of feeling like, oh, I've protected this spot in me, and now this seems common to me to protect that spot in me, and they make me protect that spot. But that's that loneliness, is the desire to let that expansion come out, that message. And how I say it in my work is, it is our unique, expansive expression. And unique is really important. That means that we aren't special and labeled and stamped with that, but we are each unique. And the beauty of it is what I came to see in my work as I wrote the book and put the pieces together is when we put all of that uniqueness together, we wouldn't be having any of these problems on earth, right? Everything would flow pretty seamlessly because we are harmonized in a way that is the nature of humanity. And it's okay we're not in our nature. I'll say this quick. One of my kiddos is a physicist, and we'll talk when they're home for the holidays about what they're learning and what they're thinking about. And this last time, they said to me, Mom, when a magnet is heated to a certain state, what happens inside of it, so here's the heat, here's the magnet, is the magnet disorders. and it can't magnetize. This is the narcissist. This is the intensity of control of I'm not going to deal with my trauma. And this is us, the enabler who's stuck in a position of I'm disordered. My ability to magnetize isn't fully on. And probably for a lot of us, it's on quite a bit, but not fully. And that's what we're after, is to get the heat to go away so that we can magnetize in an incredibly dynamic way. Oh. Okay. So because the status quo left us questioning ourselves, that was really convenient for the system of, yep, you probably aren't valuable. Yep, you caused this problem, and now we're going to doubly, have you have a consequence for something that actually the perpetrator should have had a consequence for. It's convenient for that system. And because they're never going to have to see themselves, and they end up posturing that I'm, their trauma, and never seeing it. We've had generations and generations of this. I mean, I'm the youngest of a 10-year span, and my parents were a generation above where my peers' parents were. And I feel really lucky for that, because my parents talked about nothing, but they locked it down in a way, and they would only talk about the good things. And so it's more the war era parents that I had. Really different situation there. They just could not allow themselves to see anything. And yet I know both my parents had hardship in a way where I wish they would have talked about it. I mean, finally my dad got really sick, and he couldn't differentiate some of the things about what he was saying, and he started being really vulnerable, and he said, "You don't want to hear about this." And I said, "I wish we had always talked like this, Dad." He was like, "What?" I wish we had always been that vulnerable. How sad. How sad that we couldn't be. Yeah. Okay. And we also have this situation too where we can be afraid to act or challenge the status quo because we're afraid that we will be like the person who kept clobbering us and putting us back in the status quo. That's just how it is. Life is unfair, right? These messages from that person to keep us held into this state. Because if we leave it, what's left for them? Who are they going to project this onto? They'd be forced to see themselves in a way that they might not really want to. Okay. So in this process, we're setting down the old way of being and learning how to step into the new way of being. And this is just one small step of how we start that process. When you hear it, challenge it, ask a question back to them, ask them what they mean by that, ask them if they believe it's unfair, or why it's unfair, or why that's the way that he or she is. And the new way is achieved through understanding our uniqueness and expanding into it. And a lot of people might say, "Oh, I've got this really big idea and blah, 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 and I'm going to do this and that and this and that." Nope, that's control. If you know you have something really big going on, you've got a really big idea, what do? We keep it within ourselves. Otherwise, we're posturing in some way for some external validation. We're doing what got Anita Moorjani more ill. We're looking for that validation outside of ourselves or for information. I've done it a million times when my bubble is burst because the person doesn't respond. They don't acknowledge it even. And there are people in our lives where we can share, but again, this is a nice place to go to. I've got something big going on inside, and I just wanted to share that. Right? I even texted a friend a bit ago, and a few weeks ago, and I said, I can see this one thing I haven't been able to see. And I needed to tell somebody, but I'm keeping it to myself. Or, I need to keep it to myself. And they know me and they respected that. Good, solid friendship. So where we're headed, this expansion and the uniqueness comes around not the next big idea, not oh, I'm going to do this, but it comes from when we free that part that we protected, which is in our solar plexus, right? It's in that squishy part where our ribs open up. That's where our power resides. And when we're willing to let that open, then we continue. Like we might have to have a little bit of a journey of trust or a big journey of trust, but we move into a very fulfilled state when we're expressing on that. And an example is in my book, I talk about Daniel Kish, who is blind, but he, as a child, his mother did not hold him back whatsoever. He was a very physical human, like just an active child. By 13 months old, he was completely blind, and his mom let him go. And he would pull a bookcase down on himself. He'd do all these things, but he taught himself how to echolocate. And now, once it came to a time when people said, my gosh, you need to teach this to others, then he said, I don't know that I want to do that. That's when we know it's something really powerful. The other thing is his mother, he would go to the doctor because he had accidents, but he was never taken away. Like his mother knew this is who he is and this is how he's learning about his world. And the doctors accepted that because she knew. Her power inside of knowing that's true was so powerful. She didn't question herself or thought, this is bad. Should I be doing this? She didn't look for the answers outside. And she doesn't sound like a person who was like just a powerhouse. She just was like, that's who he is. Even at school, they said he can't do the clicking, the echolocating, it's disruptive. And she said that's how he navigates his world. It's not an option. Simple. There was no drama. There wasn't petitioning and getting. They took it because she knows, she believes in him undeniably. And that's what a lot of us did not have, is this undeniable belief reflected to us of who we really are. Some of us had some part of that, or maybe all of it in one parent or both, or somebody else in our life. Like I had 3 teachers in my life who really believed in me. I even ran into one of them years later, like 14 years later after I had been in school. And he said to me, I've thought about you. I wonder what you were up to. And he said, I think you're going to change the world. It's like, what? But I was at the age I was like, I haven't done anything impressive yet. I don't know. Geez, no pressure, but that can be enough, right? To have 3 teachers really see me. One could see my emotion, one could see my intelligence, and one could see my get up and go. Like, I'm not going to hold back, right? Powerful. You could have had that, but you could have had it in a primary relationship. I don't feel I did, but that's okay. It's worked out a different way. Okay. So to stop the status quo, we need to question those who uphold it. We need to question ourselves. Why do I keep a relationship where 5 times in the past 6 months, that person has pulled me into that status quo? Is that healthy for me? Is it because if we keep letting just that little bit be overridden, the relationship is going to start to drag us down. It's going to start to disorder that magnet and break that ability to magnetize the things that are really important. Okay. So I want to tell you a story, particularly for my Minnesotans and US people, is that in the Baltics, so Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania on the Baltic Sea, in 1997, actually, I'm going to pull my notes here so that I can be sure I'm saying the right thing. I don't have them. Well, then we're going to wing it, but I'll maybe have you look that up if you want. 2 million people from these 3 countries got together and spanned about 600 kilometers over the land, holding hands. It was called the Baltic Way. And they did it preemptively a few years before the USSR broke apart. Lithuania was the first country out of the USSR. And they did it in solidarity to say, we're done with this, it's over. But they got together and connected. And there are 8 million total people in those 3 countries at the time. So a quarter of them went out and connected with each other. And a few years later, change came. So I'm just going to say that there are places in our world where even that what seems like it's not a small act, but it is in a way as an individual, it's a small act to go out and hold hands with the person next to you. But it made an impact in the news. It made an impact for the people to see how many people wanted something else. And I don't know if you know about the history there, but it's perverse. I mean, the one thing I'll say is I have a friend who, her parents grew up in Romania, and her grandparents, and during the war, they're German though. They were considered unwantables, undesirables. And her grandmother and grandfather were put in a gulag in Russia. And her grandmother would not tell any stories, just like I mentioned earlier, about that experience at all to anybody, except for my friend. When she was young, her grandmother told her all the stories over a summer that they were spending together in Canada. And the grandma at one point, my friend told me nothing about the stories except for this. The grandma said, I wish, looking at what the concentration camps were, I wish I had been in a concentration camp. And the stories of gulags and the horror of what happened there. And I know some from being in another country that had a more recent war. There are stories that I've been told that I can't even reshare because I can't get them out of my system. They're so horrifying. And this isn't the world that we are going to live in. We can look at this as the pressure to get us to stop letting the heat affect us, right? That we're like, we are not going to be disordered anymore. We're going to come back to our order. We're going to release that heat. We can do it. And we can say, let's do it together and so on, like the Baltics did. But I want us to hear that because sometimes out of hearing something like that, an idea comes as to what we can do that takes it a step further. I think one of the incredible things about Minnesota right now is it is a state where the people, out of sheer necessity, need to help each other because it's so cold, like during the winter. I tell stories about where I am right now about how it's worked, and that when I was a kid, you didn't have cell phones. And if you were on the highway and somebody spun out, we would get out of the car, like pull our car over, and we'd have carpet squares in. We'd have all these things to help them get out. We'd rock their car, but we wouldn't even talk to them because it was too cold to bother to talk to them. You just wave them, help them rock their car out, get them out, get back in your car and go. And they were like, are you kidding me? No, because it's dangerous, but we know to help each other, right? And I feel Minnesota has this advantage because we'll be meeting it in a way that is gentle, that is sensitive to other people in the community. And that's what I'm seeing happening. And the beauty of that is, if we were meeting it with any resistance, martial law could be called out, and that would take us into a greater depth of fascism. So I'm really proud of Minnesota. I'm proud to be from there. I'm proud of what Minnesotans are doing and seeing that. It is hard to watch, and I'm lots of miles away. But the world sees you too. When I say where I'm from, people say, oh, that's been in the news a lot. So they're hearing it, and they're Europeans, I'm with a bunch of international people, not necessarily just the Irish. So you are seen, and it's powerful. I think that in itself brings change for us to see each other, help each other. And I do think a solution is coming for that. I feel it. I can't see what it is, but I feel it. Okay, I'm going to just recap here, and I have a link somewhere to share with you. Gone over a little bit. Sorry, I'm a chatterbox. Thanks for your patience. I have some upcoming classes. One of them is going to be on the 21st of February, same time, because I'm doing it from Ireland and also for Minnesota. But that is about reading the book, because a lot of people I know have read the book, and I'll talk about 10 minutes about the book, and then we can do a Q&A for questions that people have. Let me just pop this link in the chat. If you're not on my email list, you can pop on there and you'll be given, the introduction and chapter 1 of the book, and then keep checking the meetup and see what classes I have coming up. The only request with the book event that's on the 21st is that you buy a book and read it if you haven't, and tell your friends to come along and do it. I'm going to have more classes on Meetup, and starting to do some things too of these mini courses that I'll have out there pretty soon. I'm just writing 9 of them, and I have a few that are almost ready to go. So I'll keep you posted on that too. But I've talked so long. Does anybody have questions? I'm okay here to. Oh, You can unmute. Everybody's muted.
I have a question, Amy.
Yes, Yan.
So you are, everything that you're saying is this is what our new reality will look like, and this is how you can move from the current reality and into the new reality. Do you um, do you have a sense of you know, what's my question? How far in the future that we're talking about transitioning to this new reality?
Well, Sian, I'm glad you bring it up because I've been thinking about doing readings on Meetup about the future. Like, not just because I can read astrology through the type of intuition I have, but I think what's important is exactly that, to see the future. So, no, I can't completely see how long. The only thing I'll say is this energy began in 1986 and it finishes in 2027, meaning the movement from start to finish of what we're doing. It's not to say that everybody will be caught up to the speed of it by 2027, but what I do sense, and I sense this for a long time, is 2027, the difference is things will shift in the favor of creativity. So I will say this, which has been echoed where I am right now. I meet a lot of people in tech because the European headquarters for a lot of the US tech companies is in Dublin. And people have been saying AI, AI when I was in London over the summer and fall, AI, AI. What my sense is AI is going to take the jobs that have been the highest paid jobs, such as financial jobs, coding jobs in computing, and so on. But what my sense is what AI can't do is really be creative. Well, AI is doing the similar thing to what is intuition. It's following a pattern and really anticipating what the next pattern would be. Our ability to do that is much more powerful because it's through sense and through a lot of information that we can take in and see where that pattern goes through experience. So my sense is we are moving into, and I said this years ago to my son because he's in science, but we're moving into a balance where science and creativity are going to have equal value. And I think, I say, and maybe I said it here, if I have, forgive me, but when I've done research on how often is science accurate, the research I found is it's 25 to 50% of the time that it's accurate. And that's in the long scheme. And you think about science as like what my son is into is more quantum, and that is constantly expanding. Right. And that's where we're headed, is not into spirituality, not into religion, not into those pieces. What we're really headed into is the expansive experience of our greatest humanness. And it's been stuffed down. I mean, if we think about intuition, or we can correlate that to knowing. I try and keep the two separate because I don't want to think about it. People think about intuition as spiritual. I think of it as very human. It's a birthright for all of us. But that knowing is a powerhouse that has been, except for places like mother's intuition to protect the man's child, right? It wasn't really about us. It was good for us because we knew. So that's my position is I think 2027, I think we're going to see a lot of change in between now and then. And I hear in the springtime, we're going to see a lot of change in tech. Does not surprise me. Yep. And then I believe it'll pick up the pace in 2027 and start moving quite swiftly to something other, which how that looks, I can't say, but that's why I've been thinking about doing the readings and seeing what does that future look like. Yeah. Because it's the creatives
Thank
that are hurting. Yeah.
thank you. I just read an article because you brought up tech. I just read an article yesterday about these bots that are organizing on their own, and they are questioning the code instructions that they are given, the morality. They're questioning the morality of the
Exactly.
code instruction that they are given, and they are organizing um, collectively to counter the code instructions that they have come to understand as being immoral. And it was an interesting article, but it suggests that the the tech revolution has is it's quantum
Mhm.
in unfolding for sure.
Well, and that can be beautiful. I mean, I'm a kind of philosophical
Mhm.
human, right? I like to think, but if we think about if it was sold on the premise that it's good for humanity, that energy could be hooked up with that idea of the bots. And then here it is coming full circle. It's a different manifestation, a type of manifestation we didn't think was possible. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yep. It's powerful. Thanks, Ian. Yeah. Other questions, concerns, worries? No, I'm just kidding. Don't worry.
I just kind of
Freakouts.
have a comment,
Yeah.
Amy, about what you said. I haven't read your book yet,
Okay. Yeah.
but very intriguing. I just want to say that what I'm really hearing you say about this idea of the model and getting out of the model makes me think about the different functions of the left hemisphere of the brain versus the right. A lot of the language that you're saying is exactly how I would process what you're calling the model. So the idea of being in creativity, you said so many keywords: creativity, collaboration, connection, makes me think of like that's the primary function of the left hemisphere, the synthesizing of many things, intuition, pattern recognition, versus being in the left hemisphere is predominantly about analyzing, categorizing, right, wrong, this or that, perfectionism, narcissism, I'm right,
Right.
ego, another word, ego.
Right.
Um, so I love how you're describing it. You're just using different language, I think, that all of us can sense, but just say it in different ways. Um, so I just wanted to comment on that. And then I'm just going to, if I may, just kind of talk about two particular books that for someone who might be interested in it, to give it more concreteness of what is this exactly. One book called Whole Brain Living by Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, and another one called A Whole New Mind by Daniel Pink, talking about right brainers ruling the future. That's what I'm just hearing you say. I just wanted to say that because I was like making all these connections, listening. I'm like, right, yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
yeah, I like that you brought this up because it gives me the opportunity to say that's exactly what I'm trying to do, or is my operating model or method, I should say, is to stay out of that concreteness because where we're headed is going to be quite abstract. So I'm looking at it from humanity, not from the psychology or the way the brain is structured or that physicality of us. And I'm not looking at it from an esoteric part of us. I'm looking at it from the humanness of who we are and explaining it from there. Because to me, that's what it's going to feel like in the future. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I guess not to get, so analytical, I think what I'm, without getting caught up in the labels, is that is the felt experience. And
Mhm.
sometimes when we're in our inner world and going through things and trying to make sense of it, we feel it because it's pre-verbal. So it is connected. But sometimes I think the language can help make it feel like we're not alone. I don't know how else to say it. Like,
Yeah.
feel like, okay, I sense this, but how do I make sense of this? And
Well,
that's does that make sense? Like the
it does,
humanness. I'm
Danica, absolutely. And I think what I'm saying is we won't have to make sense of it, but we can make sense of it now because that is a way through. It's like meditation. I say, learn how and use it when you need it. Otherwise, you don't need to. Like, because we're here to live and express and communicate and really do that. We're not here to meditate and force ourselves into that rigidity, but sometimes we need to have it to get back to ourselves because we are living in a world that is in incredible disorder, right? So I get it and totally. But I think that's why I do the work I do is and the way it is. I didn't study other people. I don't know any of these things. I just watched the patterns and saw it from this sense. And that's what people said about my book is you said everything I could feel, but I could not say for myself. And I'm like, that's my ability, right? That's it. That's the only thing. But thank you, because it does. Some of us need that concrete way, but it is a way through because that won't be the future. We won't need that. Yeah, in time. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And I said when I was traveling once, I left my charging cord in my checked luggage and I was flying a long distance. And when I got to the airport, there were no outlets. So I was asking this person, can I, use this outlet in front of you? They were eating at a cafe in this kind of bar setting. And they said, sure. And we started talking and they were chiding me and saying like, what's your book about? Blah, blah, blah. And it was just at the point of writing chapter 2. And I said, hey, knock it off. Like, that's not the way it is for me. And, so I don't know what to say. And then they kept pushing and pushing. And I finally said, my work will change completely how we think about psychology over 2 generations. And I thought, okay, I get that. I can see that. I'm thinking in a different way to move us away from that need. And, even I was at an event yesterday and somebody said they were talking a lot about this person being mentally ill. And it was a conversation I wasn't really directly a part of, but more a speaker and then this other person talking with them. And it really, for some reason, hit me. I felt it super hard inside of, yeah, when you're mentally abused, you become mentally ill. So let's stop the rest of it and just recognize when you're mentally abused, you become mentally ill. When you're physically abused, you become physically harmed. Like your body can break, you can bruise, you can have these physical appearances. Um, but again, that's the status quo to be like, oh, you're mentally ill. The stigma, I know it's getting better, but I could see it right there yesterday. I thought, boy, what are we doing?
I think that speaks to your point about we will use less language
Great.
as we move forward,
Yeah.
because there will be no need, and we can get away from the labels and the smallness of language because it's so inhibiting. Um, you know, I had another thought, Amy. You said that we will manifest things in people immediately in the new timeline. What would you say to the folks then about, or would you say anything about, the importance of minding our thoughts?
Yeah, I I understand that, but the energy for what that idea really opened. You remember in 2012 when people were saying it's going to be the zombie apocalypse or something? And that's when we opened that energy of what is called 0 point manifestation, meaning humanity has access to that to some degree. That yes, we can create our reality and do it instantaneously, but it just was opening to us where that's available. It didn't mean that we had the full reins on the dealio, but I do feel in the future, Cian, kind of why there's this piece is if we aren't speaking much and we're using sense to navigate our world, I know that Cian is just so good for me, right? A catalyst for me, an expander, um, believes in me. I believe in Cian. When we have this relationship, it's undeniable that we'll stay connected. But if something was like, okay, we don't need each other anymore, we'd fall away naturally because it would be time. There'd be no emotion around it or conversation. So as we're moving more into that sensing, we're honestly more powerful because we know. And you've met somebody who knows. Like it tends to be the old woman who's standing there among the chaos and she's completely calm. I hear about these 70-year-old women in Minnesota that are standing to protect the people from ICE because they're like, we're a 70-year-old woman. What do we lose, right? Because they know it's wrong, but they also know they're they need to be there and they're not afraid, right? They're powerful. I think that's kind of a weak example, to be honest, because we can't sense or feel that as deeply as seeing a person who, when we see somebody who really knows, mostly what we want is that. We want their ability to do that. And that's the power of like this book that I've written is it's just a precursor to help ease us in, but when we get into that knowing in a greater way and we're operating from that, like I said, our life becomes magic and people won't be jealous. They will just want to know how to do that for themselves. It becomes egoless because when we move out of the model, we drop that I am, or we drop the ego that is something that's cloying at us, you know, the addiction, the whatever, and we move into the I am. I'm expanding and nothing can hold me back. And it's true. And the other piece that we drop is the shadow. So we've reconciled the inner child so that to me, the inner child parts represent our personality parts. And when those are in harmony with us and with each other, there's nothing quite like it, right? Like my 16-year-old could be standing up and saying the speech. And then this part can be doing this piece of it that's so powerful. Right. So when we, to me, in my work, when we have released the control and we've released the shadow, there's nothing that will hold us back. And people, like I said, will see it, sense it, and want that, but they'll want it naturally. And they'll also, when they see it, be able through observation to create it in their life more freely. So the first people going through this, probably it's not very easy. I know it has not been easy, right? But once it gets rolling, it's going to be very natural. And we'll go back to language. Like when people say, I hold space for people, because that is about self-importance. That verbalization is about, I'm important. I'm valued. I can do this for them. We used to say, I showed up for my friend. I showed up for my client. Right. And that's what we did. We showed up for them to have their back. Right. It's a different, that language will change until we're really, I believe, not speaking. And there's a friend of mine beautifully told me about the telepathy tapes, which is a podcast that's I think it's out of Minnesota, honestly. And the gal figured out that there are kids who are autistic that are nonverbal. And she figured out that they're communicating with each other telepathically all over the country. And they're saying the same things, but the kids never met each other. It's powerful. I mean, incredibly potent. And the teachers who have been working with these students knew there was telepathy going on and there were too many scenarios where it was undeniable. And the school and so on said, no. And to that, I say, we weren't ready, but boy, we're right on the precipice of being ready. Right. Yeah. There's beauty coming. We got to move through this though. Yeah. All right. Other questions? No. Yay. Other things? Anyone else? Okay. Well, you have the link down below and, check out the things that I have coming up. It's great to see all of you and wishing you the best. And yeah, help us all work together to get that status quo to cease. Yeah, it's on all of us. Say in those little moments, say the thing. Yeah, to call it out. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a really great rest of your day.